50 years. 50 years of getting up before the sun, of calloused hands and aching backs, of telling myself that one day it would all add up to something. And then one morning, not long ago, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, and it hit me. Not like a revelation, more like something quiet settling into your chest, heavy and still. The thing I had been chasing my whole life. I had walked right past it, every single day, and I never stopped long enough to see it. My name is Robert. I'm 71 years old, and I live alone in a small house in Dayton, Ohio. It's the same house I've lived in for the past 23 years. 3 bedrooms, but I only use one. The other 2 have boxes in them I haven't opened since I moved in. The kitchen smells like old wood and dish soap. The carpet in the living room is worn thin in front of the television set. I wake up every morning around 5:30, not because I have anywhere to be, just because my body forgot how to sleep past that. I make coffee, I sit at the table, I watch the light change through the window over the sink. That's most of my mornings now. That's most of my days. I worked in manufacturing for the better part of my life. Started at a parts assembly plant in 1974 when I was 22 years old. A place called Harmon Industrial, just off Route 35. Loud place. Smelled like grease and metal shavings all the time. I didn't love the work, but I was good at it, and being good at something felt like enough of a reason to keep doing it. I told myself I'd move up, make foreman, maybe get into management someday. I told myself a lot of things back then. For the first few years, I believed every word of it. I put in overtime on weekends. I came in early. I stayed late. My supervisor at the time, a man named Gerald Whitmore, used to say I was the most reliable man on the floor. He'd clap me on the shoulder and say, "Robert, if I had 10 of you, I could run this whole operation with my eyes closed." And I held on to that. I held on to it like it meant something. Like approval from a man who barely knew my last name was the same thing as a life well lived. I was married back then, to a woman named Carol. We got married in the summer of 1976 on a Saturday afternoon in her parents' backyard in Vandalia. She wore a white dress with little yellow flowers along the hem. I remember that dress like I remember almost nothing else from that time. We were young. We were stupid in the way that young people are stupid, thinking that wanting something badly enough is the same as being ready for it. We had 2 kids. Our son Daniel came along in 1978. Our daughter Patrice in 1981. I loved them. I want to be clear about that. I loved them the way you love something you're terrified of losing. But love, I found out, isn't just a feeling. It's a practice. It's something you have to show up for, again and again, even when you're tired. Even when the plant's been running double shifts and your back is seizing up, and all you want to do is sit down somewhere quiet. I didn't understand that, not for a long, long time. The years at Harmon were hard but steady for a while. Then in 1989 they restructured. That was the word they used, restructured. What it meant was they cut 43 positions from our floor in a single afternoon. I survived that round, but just barely. The man who'd worked the station next to mine for 11 years, a fellow named Pete Caruso, he didn't. I watched him walk out of the building that day with a cardboard box under his arm, and he looked at me and just shook his head, like he was trying to tell me something. I didn't know what. I know now. After the restructuring, things changed at home, too. Carol had gone back to work part-time at a dental office on Salem Avenue, and the money was a little better, but the tension between us had started to build in that quiet, grinding way that you don't really notice until it's already everywhere. We didn't fight loudly. We were both too tired for that. We fought in the silences, in the dinners where nobody talked, in the way she'd be asleep by the time I got home most nights, and I'd eat something cold standing over the kitchen sink. And that was fine, I told myself. That was just how it was when people worked hard. I kept telling myself that for about 6 more years. Daniel was 12 in 1990. Patrice was 9. I can see them at that age so clearly it almost hurts. Daniel had this gap between his front teeth that he was self-conscious about, and he used to cover his mouth when he laughed. Patrice collected these little ceramic horses. She had them lined up on a shelf in her room. Must have been 30 of them. I used to knock on her door sometimes at night just to check on her, and she'd be sitting on her bed arranging them, completely absorbed in her own world. I didn't know enough then to sit down on the floor beside her and ask about each one. I'd just say goodnight and close the door. I thought I was giving her space. I think now I was just giving her absence. I left Harmon in 1997 when the plant finally closed for good. By then I was 45, and I had a resume that said I was very good at a specific job that no longer existed. I spent 8 months looking for work. We burned through most of our savings in that stretch. I picked up a job at a warehouse in Miamisburg, loading and unloading freight. Less pay, harder on the body. I didn't complain. I didn't see complaining as something that was available to me. Carol and I separated that same year. The split wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment. There was just a day when we both looked at each other across the kitchen and understood that we had been living like roommates who were too tired to even be rude to each other, and that it had been that way for longer than either of us could exactly say. She moved out in October, took the kids. I stayed in the house because she let me, and also because I had nowhere else to go. After she left, I worked. That was what I did. It was the one thing I knew how to do and the one thing that felt like it had any structure to it. I moved from the warehouse in Miamisburg to a shipping company in Kettering by 2001. Better pay, longer hours. I worked there until 2012, when my left knee gave out after a fall on the loading dock. Surgery, months of recovery, and then they told me they were going in a different direction. I was 59 years old and in more pain than I knew how to explain to a doctor. I did a few odd jobs after that, handyman work, some driving, nothing that added up to much. I started drawing Social Security at 62, which they tell you not to do if you can help it. But when you can't help it, you don't really have a choice in the matter. Daniel and I lost contact gradually. It wasn't a fight exactly, it was more like a long, slow drift. He moved to Charlotte in 2004, got married to a woman named Teresa, had 2 kids of his own. I've met those grandchildren twice, once at a Christmas in 2009 and once at a graduation party in 2018. Both times I felt like a stranger at someone else's family gathering. I smiled a lot and didn't say much and drove home on the highway in the dark, telling myself it was fine, it was fine. It wasn't fine. Patrice calls me. Not often, but she calls. She lives in Columbus now, works as a nurse. She's got a daughter, Emma, who just turned 13. The last time Patrice called was about 2 months ago. We talked for maybe 12 minutes. I remember the exact length because I looked at the clock when she hung up, the way you do when you're measuring something you can't quite name. She said she'd try to come visit before the end of the year. I said that would be nice. Neither of us pushed it further than that. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after, not upset, just quiet, just thinking about that shelf of ceramic horses in her old room, and wondering if she still has any of them. If you've been listening to all of this, I want you to know that it genuinely means something to me. I'm not used to anyone sitting still long enough to hear me out. If you're watching this, would you consider subscribing? And leave a comment down below, even just a word or two. It sounds like a small thing, but when you spend most of your days in a quiet house, knowing that someone out there heard you, It matters more than you might think. Let me keep going because there's a part of this I haven't gotten to yet, and it's the part that changed how I see everything. Last November, I had a health scare. Nothing I want to go into too specifically, but there were a few weeks where I was waiting on test results, sitting in waiting rooms alone, driving myself to appointments, going home to that quiet house and lying awake at night with thoughts that were not good company. And during those weeks, something strange happened. I started going through the boxes in the spare bedroom. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I needed something to do with my hands. Maybe I just needed to feel like I was doing something. In one of the boxes, I found a manila envelope from 1983. Inside it were birthday cards my kids had made for me when they were small. Daniel said, "Happy birthday, Dad," in big red letters, with a drawing of a baseball glove because that was the year I'd taken him to see the Reds play at Riverfront Stadium. Patrice's had horses drawn all over it, naturally, and inside she'd written in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, "You are my favorite dad in the world. I love you to the moon and all the way back." I sat on the floor of that spare bedroom for a long time holding those cards. I thought about all the overtime I'd worked so I could give those kids a stable home. And I thought about the look on Daniel's face at that baseball game, the way he grabbed my arm when the crowd roared after a hit. I thought about how Patrice used to run to the door when I got home, before I started coming home too late for her to still be awake. And I thought, when did I decide that working was the same as providing, and that providing was the same as being present? The test results came back fine. I'm not going anywhere yet, it seems. But those weeks changed something in me that I don't think is going to change back. I looked at my life not from the inside, not the way you do when you're too busy surviving it, but from the outside, like a man looking at a map and realizing he's been walking in the wrong direction for decades. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't a bad man. But I was absent. I was absent in ways that I told myself were sacrifice. And the difference between sacrifice and absence is something nobody explains to you when you're young and proud and convinced that hard work is its own kind of love. I called Patrice the week after the results came back. Not because she'd called me, but because I wanted to. I told her I'd found the birthday card she made me when she was 7. I read her the line she'd written inside it. There was a pause on the line, and then she said, quietly, "I forgot I made you that." And I said, "I never forgot." We talked for 46 minutes. I know the exact length because I looked at the clock again when she hung up, and this time it wasn't to measure a loss. It was more like I was trying to hold the moment still for just a few seconds longer. I can't undo what's gone, I know that. The years I worked late instead of going to Daniel's school plays. The weekends I spent picking up extra shifts instead of being in the house. The slow drift that turned into distance, that turned into strangers standing in the same room at a graduation party in 2018. That's all real. That happened. And I won't pretend that one phone call makes it whole. But I think what 50 years of hard work finally taught me is this. None of it meant what I thought it meant. I thought the point was to get somewhere, to build something, to have something to show for yourself at the end of it all. And I ended up with a worn-out carpet and a cold cup of coffee, and boxes full of birthday cards I'd kept for 40 years without ever once looking at them. The things that mattered were never the things I was working toward. They were the things I was in the middle of, the whole time, and didn't see. I'm not telling you this because I have an answer. I don't. I'm 60 years too late for most of the answers to do me any good in a practical sense. But maybe you're not 60 years too late. Maybe you're 28 and working yourself to the bone, telling yourself the people who love you will understand. Maybe you're 45 and the drift has started, but you can still feel it, which means you can still do something about it. I couldn't go back and sit on the floor next to Patrice and ask about her ceramic horses. But you might still have your version of that floor to sit down on. That's worth something. I still wake up at 5:30. I still make coffee and sit at the table and watch the light change over the sink. But last Tuesday I called Patrice again, just to talk. She put Emma on the phone for a few minutes. Emma is 13 and a little shy with me the way kids are with people they don't know well enough yet. She told me she likes to draw, that she's been doing portraits lately. I told her mother used to draw horses on everything when she was about her age. Emma laughed, a short, surprised little laugh, and said, "She still does sometimes." That small piece of information, that tiny thread connecting who Patrice was at 7 to who she is now, sitting somewhere in Columbus with a pencil in her hand, drawing horses when nobody's watching, that did something to me I don't have a word for. It felt like the beginning of knowing someone. Even if we're getting to it late, even if we're just starting. 50 years, and what I have to show for it is a bad knee, a worn carpet, and a 13-year-old granddaughter who laughed at something I said. I think that last part might be the only part that counts. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this, I'm grateful, more than I know how to say cleanly. If any of this sounds like your life or like someone you know, please share this with them. Not because it has the answer, but because sometimes it helps just to know that someone else has been in that quiet house, sitting with that cold coffee, asking the same questions. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd ask you to consider it. I'll keep talking as long as someone out there keeps listening. It makes the mornings a little less quiet. It makes me feel a little less like I've already disappeared. Thank you for hearing me out.